Saudi teenager Rahaf Mohammed being given asylum in Canada. Christine Blasey Ford testifying against Brett Kavanaugh south of the border. These are some of the events that have informed the conversation around women's equality and the Me Too movement over the last year. And to mark International Women's Day, we've invited three panelists onto the show to reflect on gender equality in 2019. In studio, I'm joined by two guests. Lana Lowe is a PhD student in Indigenous Law program at the University of Victoria. She is Dene from the Fort Nelson First Nations. Jennifer Willinga is a member of the Commonwealth and World Olympic gold medal rowing teams for Canada and a professor of communication and culture at Royal Roads University. And on the line from Colwood, we're joined by Dominique Jacobs, a freelance content writer. Good morning to all three of you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Jennifer, can I start with you? What do you think have been some of the strides forward that have happened in terms of gender equality in the last year or so?
Well, I think we've seen some huge milestones, and in terms of reaching broader audiences with the message that we need to strive for equality and equal representation in various communities and various tables. The Me Too movement, obviously, and Time's Up. I think some great leadership has been shown with the Women's March and in gathering and linking arms and gathering huge groups of people to stand up for these kind of rights.
And Lana, do you think the Me Too movement has reached smaller Indigenous communities in Canada? I wonder how equal it's being spread around the country.
I think the Me Too movement hasn't filtered down into Indigenous communities. Mostly because we are small, tight-knit communities. And I think about the work that Hadley Friedland has done in revitalizing Cree law. And her question is, how do we protect those we love from those we love? And I think it's more difficult in smaller communities to name your abusers. But at the same time, there are some very brave women that have come out and they've named their abusers. But I don't think the Canadian legal system makes that very safe, or sometimes it makes the situation worse for these women. So I think we need to start thinking about different legal responses to make it safer for women and girls to come out and talk about what's happening.
And Dominique, what do you think we've learned this year around what it means to be a victim of trauma?
Well, I understand as being a victim of trauma, what's recently come out is that traumatized people, and not just women, but traumatized people who have gone through sexual assaults or rape in this case, their memories are shattered. They're giving statements, but their statements can be changing all the time, and that's what we've learned. It's not that they're lying or they're covering up the truth. It's that in fact this is actually a symptom of the trauma that they've experienced through the assault. And it's really eye-opening. Many of the cases that were dismissed or prosecutors have dropped, they are now looking at it again like, well, wait a minute, this is actually a symptom of being abused and being assaulted.
I wonder what you think, Dominique, about kind of the few steps forward and then few steps back. Great strides, according to some, like the conviction of Bill Cosby, for instance, in the U.S., and then at the same time, profoundly sexist pushback on social media platforms like Twitter or others. It seems like great gains and then also immense pushback. What's your take?
Well, in both cases of R. Kelly and Bill Cosby, I think that the whole issue is much larger than these two men. I think the issue of sexual assault is an industry-wide issue. The whole entire entertainment industry is guilty of it. It can't be just one person, being able to abuse women over decades, and hundreds of women coming through that whole system of abuse. They had people facilitating this abuse. They had handlers. They had people. R. Kelly had people bringing in those young girls for him to abuse. So it's shattering and breaking the whole secrecy of it open, and holding all of the people accountable, holding the industry accountable. It runs much, much deeper than just a single man being the only attacker. in these cases.
This runs across society and at different levels and in different spheres of life. In politics right now, there's a lot of attention on Jody Wilson-Raybould, the Indigenous MP from Vancouver-Granville, who was Attorney General. Lana Lowe, what do you think it means right now to have an Indigenous woman acting as a great disruptor in Canadian politics?
Well, I think Indigenous women have long been disruptors of Canadian politics. But I really, I watched Jody's testimony and I was riveted just to see a young, brave, courageous Indigenous woman stand up to power with such integrity is something that I think is an example of how Indigenous women in this country, I think, go through our lives when we're working at levels of government and with levels of government.
What's your take on it, Jennifer? I mean, does this show the potential for something as big as politics to change? The more women are playing lead senior roles in government, for instance?
Absolutely. I think gaining access to those roles and gaining access to the opportunity to speak out. I love what Lana said about speaking to power. I think all of these examples of both that you're representing and Dominique has raised and Lana's referencing illustrate the need for a real cultural shift. So cultures are values, right? What do we actually value? And right now we value power, we value control. And what I think is coming and what these kind of individuals are calling for is almost an evolution. I mean, I think we really do need to evolve our thinking away from this need to dominate and control to a place where leadership is seen more as leading diverse voices to a table where now we can collaborate and come up with complete solutions. We need diversity. We need diverse perspectives in order to tackle complex problems. And I think that the kind of crisis state we're in right now, which we can all acknowledge, and the pace of globalization and crisis is forcing us to accept that we need to change and forcing us to accept that what we can't control and to look for new ways of operating, which have to be collaborative, creative, and embracing diversity.
I wonder about the generational change, or maybe not, but I wonder how you see younger generations of women approaching issues like gender equality. Lana, what's your take on that? I mean, do you see the younger generation behind you coming in with different takes, or how do you view the change to younger women?
I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and she noted that I have a high tolerance for sexism and misogyny. And I think that is partly a part of my upbringing, but also a part of my age. I think younger women, they're more willing to call out men's bad behavior when they see it, whereas my generation and older, it was normalized, so it's almost hard for us to see. And if we do see it, it was justified, and so then it became our problem. But I think the young women today, and I think this shows up in the Me Too movement, they're not so willing to just let it slide.
Dominique, what's your take on that? Younger generations of women and how their attitudes and what they're willing to accept or not is changing from older generations of women.
I agree with what the women said today on the panel. I think that we are seeing a shift. I do see younger women as coming up much braver, and I think bolstered by the movements that we have now, the suffragist movement, the Me Too movement. These are emboldening for young women, and to be able to see more and more women in positions of power. For example, the American Congress, we've had it's made history with the most amount of women sitting in Congress and the most amount of diverse women from backgrounds that you've never seen before in Congress. So these are really showing young women, hey, we can do this, we can get there, people will listen to us. We just need to keep speaking up.
We've just got a few minutes left, but I want to ask you each finally about expectations. I wonder how the expectations that women can have it all now and do it all, and including mothers, can perhaps oppress women. And I want to ask you your thoughts on this, rather than lifting them up. Jennifer, do you mind starting us off on that one? What would you say about expectations and how women function in the world today?
I was asked that question once, and it was supposed to be rhetorical. Hey, can we have it all? And I put my hand up and said, yeah, I think we can, and I think we can do it all too. I think what we've realized is we don't always want to do it all. So it's about making those kinds of choices, but being very clear in speaking why, what our values are, and why we're choosing to do something over something else, but also not falling victim to suddenly carrying the burden of everything. We do need to step up and lead, though, I think, and lead in a new way.
Lana?
I agree. I think there's a hyper responsibility of women in our communities. You walk into a band office, and the women are largely carrying the load of community governance and programs and service delivery. So I think this idea that women can have it all, I think can be oppressive, because we're expected to do it all as well.
And Dominique Jacobs, final thoughts from you on that. How do you view the expectation of doing it all, the possibility versus what you're doing in your life?
Well, I'm a mother of a little girl, and doing it all. I'm a single mother, I should say, of a little girl. And doing it all is just part of the repertoire. And, going through the holiday season at Christmas, I realized, yes, it's women who actually create the magic within their homes and their families. It's women. We've got to go out and we've got to work these days. We've got to be the breadwinners. We've got to be the homemakers. We've got to do absolutely everything. And yes, it does become oppressive to, have to do it all. But as Oprah says, yes, we can do it all, but we can do it all one thing at a time. we can make those choices. So for now, I'll be a mother. And, next year I will be a powerhouse businesswoman. But yes, I do believe we can do it all. We just need to take those steps and prioritize what's important.
Well, it's great to hear from all three of you this morning. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Dominique Jacobs is a freelance content writer based in Colwood. Lana Lowe is a PhD student in Indigenous law at the University of Victoria, and Dene from the Fort Nelson First Nation. And Jennifer Willinga, a member of the Commonwealth and World Olympic gold medal rowing teams for Canada and a professor of communication and culture at Royal Roads University.